Hey, welcome back to another episode of Ask Ed on BarryTsGarage, and I've got Ed right here. He's primed up, ready to go this morning.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Okay.
A little chilly this morning.
It is.
A little breeze going on, but it's not bad. So
Not
we
bad.
need a little bit of this before the temperature gets up over 100.
Yeah, I'll take every cool day I can get.
So we're so thankful to be here in the desert.
We're not
really
proud, we're just thankful.
Yeah, we're just...
And we do pay for it in the summer, though.
We do, but I like that too.
That's good.
We can stay in the house.
That's
Okay. What we got today?
All right, we got a nice variety of questions today.
Okay, we'll see what we can do.
And we're going to see if we can catch up a little bit on the questions that people have come in. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah.
It's really fun to have the interaction. People comment, and it's really good. So I'm going to get right into it here, and you're going to like, I think, how it's getting started because it's about a drag boat.
Okay.
And you know about boats.
We might know a
little bit.
Yeah. A few years ago, yeah.
Okay. So here's a question from a viewer. They've got a big block Chevy in a drag boat, okay? And it sits unused for long periods of time.
Okay.
And right now, when they pull the distributor, they use a drill with a priming shaft to get the oil going.
Absolutely.
You agree with that?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay. But he said it's a real pain. Is there a way to manually pump oil into the oil gallery to get the roller rockers going before starting it, other than doing it that way?
You can do that, yeah. Actually, you take the oil pressure line that goes to the gauge, what he's got there, hook it up. And I actually have a 5-gallon bucket here. I took a Chevrolet oil pump and welded a little bracket on it and then tapped it where it goes in like a small block Chevy oil pump.
Yeah.
Tapped it, put threads in it, and put a hose on it. Actually, I run a hose, a flexible hose, one of my air conditioner hoses where I charge air conditioning.
So it can handle pressure?
Yeah, I have a hose, 200 pounds pressure.
Yeah.
And screw that hose on there and put your fitting and your oil pressure, where the oil pressure fitting, whether it's a line or a gauge. I hope it's a line for direct oil pressure.
Yep.
And run it with a drill. And a 5-gallon bucket of oil. It don't take much oil.
Okay, so you're saying, so how
do
you
got to fill the pan?
So
You got to fill the pan with more oil because it's going to suck it out of the 5-gallon bucket.
Right.
I would take the spark plugs out, and while you're pumping this oil, crank it over.
Okay.
And that cranks up all the lifters, the oils, everything else, and actually probably oil the time machine and everything. Sure.
Okay.
And the other thing we like to do is, what's the oil company? Gibbs Oil.
Okay.
So Gibbs Oil has an oil that they called hot rod oil.
Right.
Yeah, so we've went over that before. Hot rod oil is supposedly is a military ingredients to where you can put it in a Jeep and it let it sit there for 6 months. It takes the moisture out of the things. If you let oil sit in an engine, there's moisture will get up in the valve covers.
Yep.
You take the valve covers off, it's rusty. And so this hot rod oil is something you run your Chevelle or something and then park it for a couple months and run it again.
Sure. So anything that's like, or sometimes a classic car gets put away for months.
That's right. Exactly right.
So it sounds like it somehow absorbs the moisture.
It absorbs the moisture, some kind of grease, and
somehow
eliminates that moisture in there that would actually, and moisture would cause, again, anytime you get moisture in an engine, water, it causes foam and the oil turn brown and things like that. Yeah.
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 Well, excellent.
Again, you can do it with a drill. It'd be easy.
Yeah, and his follow-up was he wishes that there was a more kind of a common way where engines had a pre-oiling setup.
I think they have I think you could buy some kind of pre-oiling. Look on the internet and see somebody has a pre-oiling where it has a bucket with an oil pump in it. It's the same thing.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I have, in my vehicle, the gasoline evaporates, of course, after a while out of the carburetor.
Yeah.
And then I don't have a vented gas tank, so it just kind of sucks the gas back.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So then I have to crank it for a while. If I haven't started it, I have to crank it for a while. And I used to be annoyed having to crank. And then I thought, hey, I'm pre-oiling this thing while I'm cranking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right.
Okay.
That's why sometimes on a vehicle like you have, Bronco.
Yeah.
You got a nice Bronco.
Well, thank you.
But electric fuel pump, where you just turn the switch on and without cranking the starter, and it's hard on the starter cranking it that much too.
That's true. I should probably.
It really is.
I should probably add
electric
that.
fuel pump and just turn it on for a couple of minutes, fill the carburetor, and fire it up, and you're gone.
I should do that.
Yeah. So
okay, we might cover that sometime. All right. Now here's a question that's may be a little bit controversial. We've talked about keeping a carburetor cool and away from the engine heat. But someone's asking, but wait a minute, isn't it true that you need heat for fuel emulsion? Sometimes heat is good for the oil, or for the fuel, I'm sorry. Is there any cases where you think heat is good?
No.
Okay.
No. We're back to the gasoline.
Yeah.
Gasoline expands, or any kind of fuel expands 10% for every 100 degrees. So we like to cool our gas. And actually in a drag car, it isn't uncommon for us to pack, between rounds or between lunchtime, we would pack ice on our intake manifold. Pack it all around the carburetor on the intake manifold, cool that intake as much as you can.
Yeah.
And we had those aluminum cans with the coil of tubing in it, and we filled that full of ice. It was called a cool can. And the oil, the gasoline came from the fuel pump through that ice and then went in the carburetor.
Yep.
And today our junior fuel car, we still cool the gas, freeze it. We have a special freezer in the truck, in the trailer. We can actually, and I think there's a law in that. I think, and top fuel cars and things, that they'll come around and check your temperature of your fuel.
Really?
If it's so cold, they'll disqualify you.
Okay, so you can cool it, but not too much.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes in alcohol, you can cool it right down and become frozen almost, be crystallized.
Wow.
And the car goes faster and faster.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would never heat up the engine.
You can heat the engine, but cool the fuel.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
We
Okay.
didn't like, I was talking about, you just said something about heating the fuel, heating the engine.
Yeah.
Too. So we would have a heater on our engines too.
Right?
And I think we were doing a hot water heater, and we pumped the hot water from the trailer, plugged in the thing, and it kept the motor warm. But for a while, we were having a little bit of problems, and I thought that maybe we were heating the motor too much for a long length of time.
Okay.
And we were having a little valve spring problems. We break a valve spring we never had before. And even though if you heat it up to 180 or 200 there, between rounds at the dragster,
Yeah.
and sometimes we didn't like that being at that hot.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why sometimes you do a burnout. And a dragster just has the water in the engine, don't have a radiator.
Right.
So we'll do a burnout, and if it's cold, we'll do a longer burnout. By the time you back it up, so you get the motor up to maybe 200 degrees. That's what we like it.
Okay.
Quick burnout, you'll be back there, and the motor's not even hot. So
Okay,
we
so
won't
it's
get
not
that
just for the-
maximum horsepower in.
It's not just for the tires. You're doing something with the engine.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a good question.
Okay. Forgive me if I've asked this one before, but there was someone that had a collection of FE engines. The 352, the 360, 390, 410, 428. Do you have any thoughts about insights? Did you soup up those engines?
They made a lot of stuff for them.
Okay.
I think the 406 was tri-power, which is 60 Ford, 4-speed car.
Yep.
Or I think the 3-speed, there was a race to 3-speeds for a while, and the 4-speed came out. And of course, the side oiler. The 427 was a high-performance motor, it really was. And some of those motors put out a lot of horsepower. Yeah, so there was different ones you could.
Yeah.
Of course, you could hot rod them, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you consider them all pretty good engines as far as how they're made?
I think they had big rod bearings and main bearings. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
The bottom end would stay together.
Okay.
And you had some connecting rods. Some of that stuff was really special. Some of those connecting rods were heavy.
Yeah.
Had different, bigger bolts in them, and the rods, and I think they were called LeMans rods.
Okay.
Things like this, yeah. It's had some with the carburetor set over to one side a little bit. Short runner carburetor.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, Ford made a lot of stuff for that FE motor, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Someone has a question about building a 2-bolt main big block Chevy with a blower, and I think someone else had asked about this before. They're thinking it'll make about 600 horsepower at 4,500 RPM.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah, a 2-bolt main, I wouldn't. Depends on what you're going to use it for. Is it on the street? It's not good for a driver on the street.
Yeah,
He's not going to race it.
Right.
Because he's driving on the street with a 2-bolt main is fine.
Well, he's worried about, if it's a fairly big, heavy car, he's worried about early crank bearing failure on something.
Crank bending?
Bearing.
The crank bearing, the main bearings.
Yeah. you
The
think
same size main bearings as they are with the 4-bolt main. It's the same.
Okay, so that doesn't
So
matter.
that don't matter. No. It's just
See?
keep good oil in it and oil pressure and things like this. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to break. Well, main bearings, 4-bolt main is where they'd be strong enough to you have to run real hard with the bolts that actually harmonics and things like the bolts would come loose.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so that's something. The 4-bolt mains you'd have twice many bolts. And you're not the cap's the same. You're going to break a main cap, and thing comes apart. It's all the same.
So you got my attention with that. So you're saying sometimes if you have twice as many bolts, you have twice as many chances of something going wrong?
No.
Okay.
Half the chance.
Half the chance.
Yeah,
okay.
I got 4 bolts on a main, and that keeps it on there stronger. Of course it is.
Yeah, okay.
Then a 2-bolt main with 2 bolts is only 2 bolts.
You're right.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
But it sounds like he's going to have some fun, and that'd be fine.
Yeah, for a street car, I guess.
Yeah, street car is fine, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. We're jumping over when you started up this Hemi the other day, a while back. You talked about the stainless steel wires that go to the spark plugs, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, with those stainless steel wires, are those good if you're trying to work on radio interference? Do those have anything to do with interference?
Sure.
Yeah?
It's good. I usually put that, whatever you're going to do, you're going to put I hope you don't have a radio, what you're going to play.
While you're running that?
While you're running the engine, yeah. Yeah, you'd probably have some kind of stereo. It wouldn't have anything to do with the stereo thing, but then, of course, that engine with the steel wires is going to have interference. I mean, even though if you have, that's why the spark plugs now, we used to have spark plugs, and of course they end up with the R rating on the spark plugs. I think that's what was resistance. So to keep that spark plug, the spark out of radio.
Right.
That's what the spark plugs were for.
Was the resistance wires, that was really just for radios, didn't help the engine?
Stainless steel wires, we still put them on it. Some of the Flathead Fords, we put stainless steel wires on them.
Okay. Someone is talking about engine cooling, just hopping over to that subject. They say water circulation helps even out the hot and the cold spots in the heads. And without it, some areas would overheat when the rest would be fine. And they're saying, why don't you just run the thermostat 10 degrees cooler if you want to run cooler? And I guess we're talking about, you showed us those extra cooling lines that go to the back.
Right, yeah.
And why don't you just put a different thermostat in?
We don't have a thermostat in it at all.
There's no thermostat in it?
No, there's no thermostat in it.
Okay.
It circulates the water all the time.
Okay. So
how is a race car now?
Yeah, in the race car.
And I would put that on a car, street car too.
Okay.
We have some 400 small block Chevys and street cars. I would still put that water hose on it, because sometimes you end up in a street car, you're sitting at a stoplight, the engine the fan's not going to blow much, and we'd actually have a smaller thermostat in the car if you were going to put one in, 160.
Okay.
That's the most I'd put in it. And I know that some of those people, the whole theory about thermostats, and I really dislike the new trucks and new cars at 200 degree all the time. And I remember the Corvettes for a while. Some of those Corvettes, the fan didn't come on to 235 temperature.
Wow.
And they did that so get it through emissions. Had nothing to do with it, but anyways, it actually in a couple of years it baked all the plastic underneath the hood.
Right.
Every vacuum hose and water neck and little hoses like we have. So many new motors, I see them nowadays have got plastic thermostat housing.
Right.
And plastic pipes that go to the heater.
And intake manifolds.
And intake manifold and stuff. And after a while, those things, you touch them, they break.
Yeah.
And even down the road, if you do whatever, that heater hose will break right off.
Yeah.
Then you got all your all your water out in the street. And it cost you, some time ago, we had one in LA, and the Chevy dealer didn't have the part. So we had to stay an extra day there, and I think he charges that we got all that thing with antifreeze and everything else was $700 on a late model Chevy Yukon or something.
Yeah, right.
So that wasn't very funny, just because it was plastic and it'd been hot a few years.
Yeah.
So I disagree with that 200 degrees temperature in a car that just bakes everything.
Yeah. Now you said another time.
Go back to the street cars and stuff. That's what his question was about,
Yeah.
I don't like to put thermostats in them if I have to. But I know there's a whole theory about holding the water in the radiator. That'd be a small radiator. And then let the fan blow the air away and put more water in the radiator. And then blow that heat away, dissipate the heat out of the radiator. There's a whole theory and all kinds of things like that. It depends on what size radiator you have.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you can control that.
Yeah. Now, going back to the race car, just 1 second. You're saying you don't have a thermostat in it at all.
No, not at all.
But you also said you like running the engine between 180 and 200 for best power.
Yes. Right.
So how do you manage that temperature?
We'll probably depends on what the heat of the day is.
Okay.
Whether we put a piece of cardboard in front of the radiator. And we can plug off half the radiator with a piece of cardboard.
Okay.
We just put it in front of the radiator and block the radiator.
Okay, so the radiator is your regulator of your temperature.
So actually the radiator. The radiator is our regulator.
Not a thermostat.
Not a thermostat. No, not at all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Somehow I forgot to ask you
It
that.
depends on in the afternoon, if you're racing in the afternoon or in the morning or something else, or at night. And what we're racing, whether we put a cardboard in front or not, but just try to get to run good, yeah.
Interesting.
Not necessarily. We don't, in that particular car, dirt track cars and stuff, you don't jet the engine to lean it down to make it get hotter or richen it up to make it get colder. We would do the water.
I see.
It's much simpler, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That's good. That was a good question, it turned out. Someone wants to follow up on the dual point distributor question. Okay. We've had a lot of questions about that. And people have different ideas of what it was all about. This person says they think it's for extending the spark dwell.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
you change the point gap, changes the dwell, and changes the timing too. Of course it does.
Okay.
But the dual points, again, was one opens, the other closes, and they're a few degrees apart.
What does it do with the dual point? Boy, I wish I had one in front of me to look at. Does it have anything to do with the temperature in the distributor also, or no?
No, really no.
Okay.
It's again, one, I think it keeps the points cooler.
That's
because they do spark. And again, the other day, that guy with the 32 Ford here, his distributor sparked enough that he was no spark, it wouldn't run. So I just filed the points with a little bit of a sandpaper and played with it a little bit and took that little burr off there because it's slag.
Yeah.
It's like if you weld something with a welder, get all done, especially a stick welder, and you hit it and knock the slag off.
Yeah.
Well, that slag is not a good conductor of anything.
Sure, right.
So with that points, I just took the slag off a little bit and adjusted it and ran fine.
Okay. So here's someone that kind of doesn't like some of the old Fords having such a big intake port. Was that the Cleveland series? Or
probably the Cleveland
block?
motor, yeah.
They had a very big intake manifold with
Too big.
Too big. Okay, so you agree it's too big?
It's too big, yeah.
They said it just kills the bottom end torque.
Yeah, right.
You agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That motor there, like a Boss 302, we played with that years ago when the car was brand new. We put headers on it and everything else, and the more we did to it, it made lots of noise and didn't go anywhere.
Right.
So we ended up we did some research and thing. You had to put the biggest camshaft you could buy, and the biggest carburetors, one or two, to get in and ran fast then. But you had to put big carburetors on it.
So those are better. Isn't that design with the big intake? Isn't that designed for high RPM more?
Probably, I think they were probably in there knowing what they were doing is not necessarily drag racing or something. It was probably NASCAR.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, NASCAR. And then NASCAR, I would think about that too because they have their own mechanics and their own thoughts. It's high RPMs and that big intake manifold actually slows the speed of the air down because it's got such big volume.
Right.
You can't control that volume that big. So sometimes you take that same motor and put a smaller set of intake heads on it, smaller port heads, and then speeds the air up and you have to do something with exhaust too and the camshaft. It all matches.
It all works together.
It all gives that and it will run a lot better.
Okay.
Yeah, it does.
Well, and that just goes back to the general idea. Sometimes we think the racing setup is what I want. And it's like no, the way I'm going to drive my car isn't the way a racing car is set
That's right,
up.
yeah. That's
So
right, yeah.
what you want, people sometimes generalize this carburetor is the only carburetor or whatever.
Yeah.
It depends.
Yeah.
But
Not bigger's not always better.
fair enough. Okay, so here, someone named John has a question, and here's a name I'll bet you've heard of. There's a guy that people may have heard of called Grumpy Jenkins. Do you remember that name?
Yeah, I like him.
You do like him or don't?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, you do? Okay,
Of
good.
course I do.
He said he seemed to remember that he liked or favored the stock GM nylon cam gear on his small blocks. He believed it reduced the valve train harmonics, and they were cheap to replace.
Of course it would. There's some things in that. On high RPMs, it might retard the cam.
How would that happen?
Well, it just stretches. It's not as positive.
Oh,
I used to know a guy, and I can't think of his name right now, from Minnesota,
yeah.
and he was sponsored a Hemi motor,
Okay.
and he ran a 350 Chrysler Hemi, the 350 motor, against our 350 Chevys.
Okay.
We had a tough time beating him. He had fuel injection. And that particular motor is talking about the same thing. It would run better with a timing chain than it would a gear drive.
Huh.
Because the timing chain would stretch a little bit and retard the cam a little bit at top speed.
I would.
Yeah, Nielsen was his name. I love that guy. Walt Nielsen, I think his name was.
Okay.
And, but Grumpy, a good guy, he had all kinds of things. And he was so smart. Sometimes I'm sure he made a lot of mistakes.
Sure.
Himself, but he wouldn't tell nobody.
That's the trick, right?
The things that you did. I did some things I'm not telling anybody that failed.
Right? We're not here to talk about
We're
that.
not talking about that, but he would know. Grumpy had some up his sleeve. That probably would retard his camshaft
Yeah.
more than gear
Interesting.
drive.
But what about the harmonics part of it?
The harmonics was sure it would take it out of there. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just
Anytime
a
you
little
can do that
softer.
with a fluid balancer on the end of the crankshaft,
Uh-huh.
takes those harmonics out of it.
Okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you, John, for that question.
Yeah. And Grumpy one time, just real quick.
Yeah.
That was kind of funny. We was out at the races here, and I looked at his. I told my friend, I said, "Watch, see what he's going to do." And Grumpy was on one side of the car, standing there looking at the motor, little Nova, and I walked up the other side, and me and my friend was talking. I says, "Well, that thing would run a lot faster if you took the air cleaner off." And then we just walked away, and I says, "What?" We walked away, and I said, "Hey, what did Grumpy do?" And he said, "He just stood there looking at me, stared at me," because we know that he had the air cleaner on there to slow the speed down in the engine, the
Okay.
airspeed in the air cleaner, and you wouldn't have to have smaller jets in the carburetor.
Okay, so there's a reason to do
Yeah,
that.
he had an air cleaner on to slow the speed down. He had a bigger carburetor on, slow the airspeed down, and then he wouldn't have to rich the carburetor up. He knew what he was doing.
Well, there's
just
another
funny.
whole science that we haven't talked about. Is there's a whole bunch of different air cleaners out there,
Absolutely.
and most people just don't even give it a thought.
That's right, yeah.
But that can actually affect the airspeed and how the carburetor's breathing.
How it breathes, yeah.
And is it always bigger, better on that case? Apparently not.
No.
Okay.
All kinds of air cleaners. And the air cleaner, the base of the air cleaner, what it's shaped like, where it goes in the carburetor.
Okay.
It was higher or lower and stuff, yeah.
Because I
I
think
think a Dr. Cook had a Blazer,
okay.
a brand new Blazer. And I'll put it back in whatever the Blazers came out in 70 something.
Yeah.
And he actually had a big air cleaner on it, and he had a bunch of holes drilled in the bottom of the air cleaner. Then he had a snout on it, air cleaner snout, and he had that plugged.
Okay.
And I think he was getting like 18 miles to gallon on that Blazer.
Interesting.
And I don't know how much hours and hours it was a doctor. Actually, he owned Dr. Cook. I'll remember his name because I think he's passed away now, but what a nice guy he was.
Huh.
And we did a bunch of motors for his different projects he had, and he was quite unique. He owned Valley Radiologist here in town. I think all the x-rays in town.
Oh,
But that
wow.
was it. You have to pay him.
Wow.
But what a guy. And anyways, he had jetted this carburetor and played with this motor. And original tires and wheels on the Blazer. But I think it was getting 18, 19 miles a gallon with that Blazer.
Nice.
It was
Wow.
kind of interesting to see him do that.
Yeah.
And some of the things you can do if you got a lot of time.
Yeah. It's experiment, right?
Yeah, experiment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, we
it
may have to come back to that subject sometime and talk more about
Air cleaners.
Air cleaners. I think there's an idea that because people for marketing, you know, these aftermarket companies, they'll try to sell you these air cleaners. Like K&N. They have a lot of different designs, and they're probably all fine as far as doing their job, but they may not all be best for your car.
Well, I don't think it's K&N air cleaner. They don't pay me nothing, but I would say so. I've known them for a long time and had some of the people that work for them and things and filters here, but they do a lot of research.
Yeah.
And I think a K&N filter or some of those plastic filters and stuff like that, it always is a benefit to your motor.
Well,
always. There's nothing that says that that's going to hurt the motor.
No, I think I didn't say it right. What I meant to say is good clean air and cleaning and filtering is good.
Absolutely.
I'm just talking about, it's to the original thing about Grumpy. How much air do you want? Like, do you always want the most possible air, or maybe sometimes not as much?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Like the Thunderbolts and some of those places, they took the inside headlight out and put scoops in it.
That's right.
And then ran big tubes into the air cleaner, big pipes and stuff. And that was all good. I don't think the carburetor took any more air than it had to be.
Right.
But then look at these air cleaners. I've seen some of the race cars and stuff, but supercharged, and some of these cars are going 240 miles an hour, drag cars, and they have this huge air scoop, and then the air scoop is with the supercharger's got four big holes in it, and it scoops down the little bitty pipe and then goes in the injector, goes in the blower, and
right.
All these big scoops down in front of the grill and stuff that scoops in air at 200 some miles an hour. Oh, it's all beneficiary.
Yeah.
And they all know what they're doing.
Right.
Without a doubt, they know.
Yeah, that's not an accident.
It's not an accident. That's right. Exactly right.
Now we're going back to the J.C. Whitney carburetor gizmos, we'll say.
Okay, all right.
All right, that's the subject. And it was a reminder. You were talking about like a propeller thing that was.
Yeah, they had that for, yeah.
So anyway, this is in that idea. He said, we used window screen gaskets under our updraft carburetors on things like our Ford 8N to help with carb frosting. So I guess the screen was dividing the fuel somehow, or?
It makes it atomize it.
Okay.
It keeps it from big raindrops.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's.
And that was the thing that, again, the thing with the J.C. Whitney's with his propeller things and whatever else. And,
yeah.
And they read the instructions on it, and they said the last thing you do is bump the timing up 4 to 6 degrees.
Right.
And that was the funny
part.
That's what made it run.
Yeah, right.
Not to say these impellers, but I always worried about the impellers if they ever come apart and went through the motor.
Oh, yeah.
So I would be worried about that. The door screen, the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
The door screen's going to go flap up and down so many times it's going to come apart.
Right.
And it's going to go through the motor, whatever you got there.
Yeah, so that would be a little bit of a risk
That'd be a little risk factor.
Yeah.
And I think some of the things that we had, the guys just said a while ago now about cooling the engine or heating up the carburetor, stuff like this, is we've always liked in favor of putting insulators underneath the carburetor.
Yeah.
And Mr. Gasket used to sell an aluminum plate, and it was maybe a half-inch tall. A quarter-inch tall with an aluminum plate and a piece of gasket, and another aluminum plate and a gasket to keep the carburetor cool.
Okay.
Keep it off the intake manifold.
Okay.
And just like the flatheads, I always drive plugs in those heat risers.
Right.
So always in the motor, so it don't heat up the intake manifold.
Okay.
And we've plugged them on the small block Chevys. I cut a Coke can up and put in those things up there, if nothing else, and keep that exhaust heat off the intake manifold down the ports and stuff.
Have you even used a wood spacer?
Wood?
Yeah.
We're not having a campfire. Why would I want a wood spacer?
I think someone's mentioned that one time.
Did they?
Yeah.
That's good for a campfire.
Yeah, you don't want to put wood in there.
No, we don't want to put wood in the motor.
Okay. I got one last, it's kind of a two-part question. We're going to probably end on this one. And we're still on flatheads on this one. Instead of grinding one side of the lifter bolt, why not use adjustable thread cutting die for a looser fit? And I'm not sure I follow what that's about.
Well, he wants to, on our lifters,
Okay.
he's thinking about taking the threaded part of that lifter, adjustable lifter,
Yeah,
and make it easier to adjust.
I see.
It's got to be just about so much. You need it to be firm and not loose.
What happens if they're loose?
Well, they'll come undusted.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll have major problems at it.
Okay.
So we want to put that lifter down in there inside the motor, and we want it done as correctly as we can. But it's got to be snug, and really snug.
Right.
Not necessarily. I see people sometimes putting Loctite on it and things, and that might well work. But I don't know if I'd take a thread cutter.
Okay.
And if I don't have a thread cutter, a die, I think it is a fine thread.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is a quarter-inch thread cutter, something like this.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm not sure. That would be trial and error.
Yeah.
I've did mine. I know what I can do here.
You know it works for you anyway.
Yeah.
All right. The second part of his question, and I think this is good follow-up, is can you install new valve seats and cut them for bigger valves, or is there even room to put a little bigger valve in the flathead?
Well, 1.6 is about as big as you can do, and that's what normal. That's what they.
Okay.
But then you could just do that with a cutter.
Okay.
You don't have to put seats in.
Okay.
And I dislike putting seats in a motor any more than I have to. That's something else to come loose. You get hot and cold. Even all of our motors, we have seats in them, and some, if you're not careful, the problem is it's just something else to come loose. A lot of times on a flathead, you might cut through the water jacket too.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how thin those seats are. I've never cut one out to see how thick it is when they're on that seat.
Yeah.
I wouldn't start putting seats in a head unless it had to. There's no reason to put a valve in it that I understand any bigger than a 1.6.
Yeah, I think our friend Steve has done that, the 1.6.
Yes, I think, that's what he does.
I think he did.
And he knows all his things, and our friend in Albuquerque, they know what they're doing, and Steve knows too.
Yeah, I think, are you talking about Joe Abbins?
Joe Abbott, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think 1.6 I don't know if he's ever, and I think they were doing some flow testing that too. Mm-hmm. And that 1.6 is as big as they need. I think Steve's done some things with some valves. Had somebody make some valves in different shapes in the valves. Underneath the edge, and where you can grind them 3 or 4 angles underneath there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And still to flow. On a flathead, you're going to get some horsepower out of it, but what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
have fun. Yeah.
Fun. It's fun. Yeah. Okay. Someone named Shag. He said, I'm an avid fan of these Q&A interviews. He says,
okay.
He loves the interviews. He said,
I have a lot of people love them, and I enjoy doing them.
Yeah, it's fun.
I give, I shouldn't say some, but anyways.
Yeah.
Me and the wife were out eating from time to time, and I enjoy that.
Yeah.
When I get ready to pay my ticket, my bill at the restaurant, and somebody's already paid it.
Wow.
So
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, and then we
That's very nice.
Visit a little bit always. Thank you. Much, much, much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
That's cool.
I can afford my breakfast.
Yeah. But sometimes people
want
want
trouble paying something. Yeah, but even though I appreciate that.
That is cool. That is cool. Okay, so he's a big fan. He said, my grandpa is a lot like you. So it's a younger guy.
Good, okay.
Okay, and he says his first car was a Porsche 924. That's a little 4-cylinder, I believe. And he's curious, have you ever worked on VW Porsche water-cooled engines or any overhead cam inline 4 imported engines? Have you had any work with those?
Not really.
Okay.
I had Volkswagens. I used to overhaul a lot of Volkswagen motors.
Okay.
We had them in our sand buggies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I did a lot of those. And
those were air-cooled, though.
They were air-cooled, just the 1600 motors and dual carburetors and stuff like that, yeah.
So you've had a lot of fun with those VW engines.
We did have a lot of fun with them, yeah.
Okay.
And you had to repair them quite often. They didn't hold up that well. There was a guy the other day here at the shop asking me some questions, and he got one someplace, Volkswagen. I see the Volkswagen, it was awesome. I was just impressed with the Volkswagen, and he got out of the storm down south someplace in Florida.
Oh, the hurricane
in Florida. It was a little Volkswagen with chop top and a big motor and everything.
Oh, wow.
And I think he didn't know how long it had been setting, whether it was in a flood or not. But he was asking me questions there. It's not having to do with this air-cooled things, but we kind of confirmed between him and I that the valves, the lifters were stuck.
Huh.
Yeah, we don't know how much moisture had been in that motor.
Yeah.
It cranks over and everything, but and it had a nice motor in it. It was really a nice car.
Interesting.
Yeah, kind of interesting.
And by the way, I want to say thank you for being a fan and for asking a question that's off the topic a little bit.
And the newer motors, I don't. And some of the foreign car motors, I don't mess with them at all.
Right.
Well, I'm too old for that. And
Yeah.
some of the guys in the shop, I don't have anybody in the shop over here that actually owns one.
Okay.
That where he would be in here playing with it all the time. And no, I do not have that.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up for now.
Good.
Thank you, Ed. That was great.
Okay, good.
Those are good.
I keep thinking I wish sometimes I need to talk louder and slower.
Oh, yeah.
I think it'd be better. So I got to concentrate on it a little bit, maybe make this a little bit better. I can understand a little bit.
I want to improve too, so I will try not to interrupt you too much.
Okay, that's fine.
That's what I got to do.
Okay.
And I'll let you take your time to answer. That's good.
Yeah, that's
good.
That's fine.
Well, thank you also again for being part of the show and for sending in your questions and comments. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next one. Thanks for being a part of BarryTsGarage. And if you want some Ed Smith memorabilia, some hats and shirts and all, it's just edsmithspeed.shop. Head over there and have a look.